That sounds like a great idea. If you can give me a bit of each of the specials to start, I will pick the ones that seem best.
Carl agreed. She began to load a plate with a little bit of everything, and Carl took it back to an empty table, where he began to work through them one at a time. The effect was the same as the pasta. His body was just absorbing much more energy from the food than it had been before, and the excess was building up for him to channel into Hawk's surroundings. Carl smiled at the cafeteria lady as he returned his empty plate.
I think that the pasta and the meatloaf are the two best specials of the day. But whatever changed in my body, they're all better for my training efficiency. How much do you need for the evening?
She asked, lining up plates on her counter.
2 each should be enough for the night. I'll come early in the morning so that I can have a heavy breakfast as well.
Carl smiled at the lady again and left. The food arrived outside the room at the same time that Carl did, on a small cart pushed by one of the staff members. They had covered the loaded plates with foil to keep the heat in, but Carl could smell it following him down the hall, and Hawk was getting increasingly excited about the idea of both more food and an improvement in his living conditions.
Thank you for that. I will return everything in the morning,
Carl informed the kitchen staff worker.
Just set the cart in the hall with your dishes, and we will come pick it up when we clean the halls,
the worker explained. Then she walked back to the elevator, and Carl took everything inside so he could focus on eating and meditation. The food smelled delicious, and even the first serving, which had filled his body with energy to be burned off, wasn't enough to actually sate the hunger. Once he was settled into a comfortable meditation position in the middle of the bed, Carl began to focus on the improvements to the taming space. The excess energy was pouring freely from him into the space, causing the tree to grow and the patch of grass underneath to slowly but steadily expand. Once that burst of energy was gone, Carl paused to pick a plate from the pile. The obvious choice would be the pasta, as he knew for sure that it was a good one, and he had it devoured in a matter of minutes, while briefly wondering how much he was going to regret his overindulgence in the morning. The energy flowed into him just as smoothly as it had the first time, and Carl poured it all into the taming space, then repeated the process with the meatloaf special. As he finished transferring the energy from that one into the space, a feeling of fullness, like he wouldn't be able to transfer much more energy, appeared in his mind. That was a good sign that this was not some bottomless pit where he was throwing energy with no end in sight, but the space itself was far from complete. As the space began to resist more transfer, Carl carefully moved the nest up into the tree, so Hawk could have a more natural spot to sleep, and looked at the small grass patch at the bottom. At this rate, it would take months to even fill the rest of the space with grass, much less add a sky and everything else it would need to feel like its own little world. But the feeling of power in his body was being influenced by the abundance of energy, both in his body, left over from the meal, and from the beast or taming space itself. Maybe he could get Sergeant Rita to test his strength next weekend, after he had more time to adjust. He might really have made it to the awakened standard, and not just based on the attack power of Rend. Now that the beast space was fully sated for the moment, Carl focused on seeing what he could do with the leftover energy. First on the list, since it was food-based, was to try giving the excess directly to Hawk. The bird's body happily accepted the power, but Carl couldn't tell if it was making any appreciable difference. It made Hawk happy, though, so it really wasn't a loss. They were partners now, and a happy partner was never a bad thing. For the rest of the night, Carl focused on using all the energy that he could muster to empower Hawk, who had finally reached the end of his growth phase, and had started to increase only in power, but not in size. Carl managed to finish the remaining 2 meals at breakfast, as Hawk was feeling hungry again and wanted the filtered energy in addition to its meat and the daily allowance of berries to flavor his food. With the amount that Hawk ate, Carl felt like he might have restricted the consumption of junk food too much. It made a good seasoning for Hawk's meals, and it didn't hurt his appetite, so there was no real reason not to let him use them all the time. On the way back to the room from the patio to wait for Rita, Carl went and picked another 3 mountain gooseberries.
Now that you're fully grown, you can have more of the berries. They won't make you stronger, but I know that they taste good.
Carl informed the overjoyed windspeed hawk.
Good stuff. I will put them on everything.
Hawk agreed. That gave Carl an idea. The meat that Hawk was eating was just plain meat. Normally, the discount cuts that his mother bought would marinate in a sauce overnight. If he squished the gooseberries into a bowl of water and threw the meat in with them, it would coat everything, just like Hawk wanted, without running them out of berries. He would set that up tonight, so Hawk's meals would be ready for tomorrow. A knock at the door let him know that it was time to get to work, and when he opened it, he noticed that Sergeant Rita was giving a curious look at the cart full of empty dishes.
Something changed in my appetite yesterday. It seems to be back to normal now, but I was just ravenous, and my body was taking in all the energy that it could get.
Carl explained.
That's relatively normal. It usually happens to warriors when their body advances a rank and needs to adapt to a new power standard. I suspect that you actually made it to the awakened rank in body last night, or Hawk did, and the energy needed to come from you. One of those 2 answers is most likely the correct one. How is his growth coming?
Rita replied.
He looks fully grown for a windspeed hawk. He was growing quickly again last night while I was feeding energy into him and the space in my mind, but then it seemed to settle.
Carl called Hawk out onto the bed, and Rita crouched to get a better look at the proudly preening Hawk.
He looks more mature now. The softer feathers are gone, and the pin feathers are larger and stronger than the last time I saw him. Your skill is brilliant. 1 week to bring a windspeed hawk to maturity. Even if your ability was just to train combat birds, I can guarantee that the Academy would still rate it as a top-notch success.
She looked at Carl and smiled.
Wait, that's not the end. You've just had a free taste. Now get the full story on the Pocket FM app, link in description. Check out our next video and playlist, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.